What makes a video game story compelling? Can a video game convey a story in a more compelling way than in other narrative-based media? The first answer that might pop into many people's heads could be, of course not. Who would honestly think that any game holds up to the literary classics? And, in terms of popularity, this definitely appears to be the case. While video games such as BioShock, Mass Effect, The Witcher, and Undertale may have enthralled their player bases with highly entertaining and thought-provoking storylines, there is no doubt that movies are much more highly regarded in this respect. These movies range from the Star Wars franchise, captivating the youths of many generations with its fantasy setting and plot, to the highly appraised Citizen Kane, renowned for having an almost perfect technical presentation of an entertaining and engaging storyline. And while game designers such as Hideo Kojima might have expertly weaved in thought-provoking insights about censorship, democracy, and world superpowers into his Metal Gear Solid series, most would think his storytelling pales to contemporary authors, such as Ray Bradbury in Fahrenheit 451, or George Orwell in 1984. In American society, video games are rarely the first medium citizens go to if they want to consume a storyline or be impacted by somebody else's tale. But what if I told you that, at least in some instances, video games can be better at relaying stories than other mediums? For stories that are trying to convey a personal message or emotionally relays someone else's experiences, video games can be the best way to go. While traditional, narrative-centric media can present the characters and happenings within stories in a compelling manner, video games as a medium have the advantage of granting their players agency within their stories, allowing them to directly empathize with the same story elements by experiencing it themselves. One game that perfectly encapsulates how stories can sometimes be told better through video games as opposed to other mediums is the topic of today's video, Hair Knot. Hair Knot is a game that conveys one simple central message. Stop touching black women's hair. Seriously, don't do it. From the start screen description, which describes Hair Knot as a game about a black woman who's tired of people touching her hair, to the ending screen, which tells players that this is an issue black women face daily, and implores them to, quote, stop that shit, game designer Momo Pixel sends a pretty clear and overt message to her player base. But to reduce Hair Knot solely to this message would undersell the creativity of the game's concept, and effort put into the game on the whole. Players get to choose from a variety of dark skin tones and distinctly feminine African American haircuts, before picking a luxury destination to vacation to. The player's story then truly begins when they experience a variety of colorful, pixelated scenes, listening to bouncy, retro music on the way to the airport. This scenery is, unfortunately for the protagonist, encroached by the long, grabby white arms and overly personal voices of various white women. In order to progress, the player avatar must swat away these arms using the left and right arrow keys to fill up a progress bar. Swatting at empty spaces and letting the arms touch the player's hair makes this bar go down. The player is sure to be somewhat frustrated at the increasing rate at which the hands touch their avatar's head as they progress through Hair Knot's various levels, only for these feelings to be alleviated once they reach their destination. But what exactly is special about Hair Knot and how it conveys its message? And what does it say about how we conceive narratives in video games in general? To answer that question, let's look more critically at some of the mechanics of Hair Knot and what the player can control throughout the game. The player is given exactly 3 choices to make, all at the very beginning of the game: their skin tone, their hairstyle, and the destination they're going to vacation at. Even for a 5-minute game, these are short, relatively inconsequential choices which only affect the aesthetics of the game, such as how your character will look. And even then, your choices are limited in their scope. The player then relinquishes any semblance of control they have at the beginning of the game once they progress to the actual story. They are restricted exclusively to using the swatting mechanic and are required to beat back a barrage of hands that assault the player throughout each scene. We can notice that, during the story, the player generally has a lack of control of what's going on around them, experiencing and reacting to what's around their avatar. The player is effectively simulating what it's like to be a black woman out in public, the experience related through these limited game mechanics. David Myers, in The Video Game Theory Reader 2, describes what the effective role of a player is in games with simulator-like qualities. It is the player's goal to neither divert nor test the game, but to accept and absorb it, much in the same manner of attending a theater, or watching television, or reading a book, wherein the narrative structure serves as simulated and the video game player serves as a relatively passive participant. Applying this to Haranaugh, the way in which the player simulates being a black woman evokes a similar narrative experience that would have occurred if the player had read a book about a black woman whose personal space is being violated, or a movie in which a black woman's hair is perversely stroked. But then what makes video games different from books or movies? Why couldn't Haranaugh have been a short story? Well, originally, Haranaugh was a brief story. Game designer Momo Pixel originally created Haranaugh in script form. She wanted to find an answer to some of the issues black women faced, and figure out how they could be addressed. But she ultimately, quote, realized that a video game would explain the issue phenomenally better. We might not know the exact reason Momo Pixel thought Haranaugh would function better as a video game as opposed to a script, but there's an obvious difference between the two that could account for her line of reasoning. Video games is agency. Agency, which I define here as the ability to engage in and interact with different elements in video games, marks a key difference between itself and the book and movie mediums, game mechanics playing a crucial role in crafting a player's experience. Patrick Jagoda and Peter McDonald touch on this general idea of a player's sense of agency through game mechanics in the chapter Game Mechanics, Experience Design, and Effective Play. They state, quote, mechanics mediate between rule-bound situations and player affects. As Teckenboss and Zimmerman put it, to play a game is to experience the game, to see, touch, hear, smell, and taste the game, to move the body during play, to feel emotions about the unfolding outcome, and to alter normal patterns of thinking. To directly relate this line of thinking to Haranaugh, it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume the conversion from a script was due to this investment players feel when playing video games, specifically in regards to emotion and thinking. Assuming the target audience of Haranaugh is not black women, its story being told through a script would only relay what black women have experienced, allowing its consumers to distance themselves emotionally from the main subject of the story. In contrast, the archaic and interactive nature of Haranaugh requires its players to experience these women's unpleasant encounters by proxy with their character. This elicits a more personal and perhaps even visceral experience for the player, as they are almost forced to step up into a black woman's shoes and become invested in their predicament to proceed through the game. So we now have a decent theory behind why Haranaugh was made as a video game instead of a short story or script. But what does this choice say about video games in general? You might be thinking that Haranaugh is an interesting concept, or that it's a fun, short time sink which players can learn lessons from. But ultimately, Haranaugh is just a tiny part of a burgeoning world of video games. So why does it matter? And to that, I'd say there's two main points to take away from Haranaugh: how it succeeds in conveying its message, and what this implies for video games in general. Haranaugh may directly tell the player what it wants them to do, or in this case, why not to touch a black woman's hair. But where the game really excels is how it conveys this message through its gameplay. It constructs a brief, simple-to-understand narrative of a black woman traveling to the airport and puts the player directly in this woman's shoes, practically forcing them to empathize with the woman to progress through the game. Haranaugh succeeds in using its game mechanics to enhance its core message in a unique and compelling way that could not have been replicated by more traditional storytelling media. The way game mechanics can enhance a message, theme, or narrative within a game is not restricted to Haranaugh either. As long as a video game can have a player assume the role of one of its characters, there is the potential for their players to connect on a more emotional level with the game's narrative as opposed to other traditional media. So maybe think about that next time when you follow the narrative within a game or want to tell your own story. I'm Max, and thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.